For decades, the
Thank you so
powerful
much.
told us to
And
look
first
the
of
other
all, let me
way.
just
They
say
said
that
Jeffrey
we are
Epstein was
standing
just
before
one
you.
man,
We're
a
having this
lone predator
conversation
hiding
because
in
of
plain
the
sight. But
oversight
today
Democratic
inside
leadership.
Congress,
And
that
so I
myth
want to
shattered.
reiterate
For the very first
that
time,
it's
a
the
survivor
Democratic
stood
leadership
up in
on
front of
oversight
lawmakers
that
and
has
told her
truly been
story.
able to move
After
this
years
forward.
of silence,
I'm sure many of you
intimidation,
don't
and
recall,
cover-ups,
but we
she
were sent
finally
home
spoke. And what
early to try
Representative
to
Jasmine
avoid
Crockett
being
revealed in
able to
response
take
made
a
one
vote
thing
on
clear.
something
This
like
was
getting
never
these
just about
files.
Epstein.
We
This
are
was
about
about
doing
a
real
system
transparency.
designed to
We don't
protect
care who's in the
predators and
files. We
silence
are going after
victims.
you. Thank you so much. And first of all, let me just say that we are standing before you. We're having this conversation because of the oversight Democratic leadership. And so I want to reiterate that it's the Democratic leadership on oversight that has truly been able to move this forward. I'm sure many of you don't recall, but we were sent home early to try to avoid being able to take a vote on something like getting these files. We are about doing real transparency. We don't care who's in the files. We are going after you. So if I had to sum up what happened today, we heard the stories of victims, and honestly, we heard the story of at least one person that has never come forward before today. This was the very first time that she was telling anyone in a semi-public way her story. And if I had to summarize the theme, I would say that their theme was to do something. It is probably the theme of the American people in general right now when it comes to government, is that they want us to do something. So yes, we had the roundtable, but they actually want to see some action. The fact that this started off in the 90s, and we had someone who could talk about what happened to them in the 90s. But then you go down the line and you've got somebody that's telling us their story from 2008. These failures led to years and years of abuse that did not have to take place. And so the reality is this. Some think that this is all over and some think that nothing else is going on. But if there was ever a RICO case, it would have been the Epstein case. So how we went from something that should have been RICO because of how sophisticated of a system this was, and this wasn't just one little sick old man that was doing stuff, but there were so many layers, whether we're talking about the banks that were involved, whether we're talking about those that worked for him, that helped him, whether we're talking about the monster known as Maxwell, and that's exactly how y'all need to refer to her. She is a monster. She is not a victim. So let me tell you, I want some action items to come out of this because for once we somewhat look like we're bipartisan in the Oversight Committee. Number one, we need answers. We need answers on why it is that Maxwell was transferred from her current station or her former station in Florida down to Texas. We need to have an understanding because everything that I heard today leads me to know that for sure she was all up and in and through this entire process, not to mention that she was indicted by a jury of her peers and then she was tried and convicted and given 20 years. So why is it that we had somebody, again, it almost seems like we are doomed to repeat our failures, because why is it we have high-level people that seemingly are running cover for a criminal? And that is what she is. She is a monster and she is a criminal. So number one, we need answers on what happened with that transfer, why it took place. And honestly, we all need to stand together and say that Maxwell needs to go back to where the monsters go, which is to a higher level of security. We also need to understand that Debbie Wasserman Schultz has legislation that she has been trying to push forward. And so in a bipartisan way, we all need to get behind Debbie, because we found and what we learned is that there were loopholes as it relates to the Crime Victims Act. And so we've got to make sure that no other victims suffer in the way that they did when you have somebody like Alex Acosta that decides that he wants to play games and dismiss a case and never inform the victims of what's going on as is required by law. So we are going to have to fix those loopholes to make sure that that doesn't happen, because it took them 10 years of fighting this, and ultimately by the time they got to the end of it, well, it also was Jeffrey Epstein's end, and so there was not a resolution for that. And the final thing that I think that we need to do is, obviously, we need to continue to push forward and make sure that we get all the files, because we know that we have not received them all. Because I am standing in front of the press, I'm also going to make a plea. one of the things that I realized was that there's a lot of stuff that the DOJ may have, but honestly, if you don't have a thorough investigation, and I can't say if we had a thorough investigation or not, we have no idea. But the reality is that when you have investigators that go out and they collect information. I am not necessarily convinced that they even have gone out and done their due diligence to fully investigate this case in the first place. So if there's anyone in the public that believes that you have information that would be valuable, you've never been able to get through to federal agencies, or no one would listen to you when you try to go forward and bring information forward, I am asking that you trust oversight DIMS and you bring that information to us. Or if you know where some information is contained, let us know so that we can then send subpoenas out that way. We want to do right not only by those that have already suffered under Epstein, but we want to prevent other trafficking rings that we know are out there. We want to make sure that we are doing right for future generations. So with that, I now have the honor of presenting to you the firecracker out of New Mexico.
The room went silent when the survivor spoke. Imagine carrying that story since the 1990s, living with the memory, knowing powerful forces wanted it buried. This wasn't a press conference or a news leak. This was sworn testimony, a victim standing in Congress, that has never happened before. It wasn't just personal, it was historic, but Crockett didn't let it end as a story of trauma. She turned it into an indictment of the entire system, a challenge to the very institutions that failed these women for decades. She reminded everyone, Epstein was never acting alone. This was organized. This was layered. There were banks moving his money, elites funding his lifestyle, staff coordinating logistics, and of course Ghislaine Maxwell, the woman Crockett did not hesitate to call what she is, a monster. Not a victim, not a pawn, but a willing partner. And then Crockett dropped a word that changed the tone instantly, RICO. Because when you strip away the excuses, what Epstein built looked exactly like organized crime, a criminal enterprise operating for decades, crossing state and even international borders. Yet somehow, it was never treated that way. That's where the cover-up comes in. Think about it. Multiple decades, multiple administrations, multiple chances to act. Yet time and again law enforcement looked the other way. Prosecutors cut secret deals and powerful names stayed hidden. Crockett brought up Alex Acosta, the former U.S. attorney who gave Epstein his infamous sweetheart plea deal in 2008. Victims weren't even told, an outright violation of the Crime Victims Act. That wasn't incompetence, that was protection. A system bending itself to shield the wealthy and well-connected while leaving survivors in the dark. And as Crockett pointed out, those loopholes remain. That's why she pushed Congress to back Debbie Wasserman Schultz's legislation to fix those gaps in victim protections. Because every time the law fails to notify, every time prosecutors secretly negotiate behind closed doors, victims are betrayed. Crockett's demand was simple: close the loopholes, stop the excuses, and make sure no future survivor endures the same betrayal. But then came the question no one in that chamber wanted to hear. If the system is so committed to reform, why do we still not have all the Epstein files? Crockett said it plainly: oversight Democrats still haven't received every document, not even close. And she suspects the Department of Justice never even did a thorough investigation in the first place. Think about what that means. For years survivors screamed to be heard. For years media outlets speculated about Epstein's connections, and yet Crockett believes the government may have never pulled on the full thread. That's not just negligence, that's deliberate silence. Rumors have swirled for months about why certain files remain sealed. Some claim foreign intelligence agencies may have been involved, that Epstein collected compromat on elites around the world. Others whisper about names buried deep in those files, politicians, CEOs, even royalty. None of it is confirmed, but the secrecy only fuels speculation, because when documents stay hidden, when files are withheld, people assume the worst. And Crockett leaned into that, making a direct plea to the public: if you know something, if you have evidence, come forward to oversight. Because if the DOJ won't dig, maybe Congress has to. Then she pointed to Maxwell. Why, she asked, was Ghislaine Maxwell quietly transferred from Florida to Texas? Transfers like that usually happen when authorities want to move someone out of the spotlight. but in this case, it looked like protection. A convicted trafficker sentenced to 20 years suddenly shifted with little explanation. Crockett demanded answers. Was this convenience, pressure, or something darker? Because every unexplained move chips away at accountability. And if Maxwell, called a monster by Crockett herself, still receives special treatment, then the cover-up is alive and well. The larger truth is this: Epstein's story has always been about more than one predator. It's about the imbalance of power in America. It's about how wealth and influence bend the law. Crockett's words hit harder because they tapped into what so many Americans already believe, that the system isn't built to protect them, it's built to shield the elite. That's why this hearing mattered. For once, victims weren't sidelined. For once, the myth of Epstein as a lone wolf collapsed in front of the cameras. But Crockett didn't stop there. She issued a challenge to all of us. Justice won't come just because a round table was held. It won't come because a bill is introduced. Justice will only come if the public refuses to let this story fade. If we demand the files, if we demand that every enabler is named, if we hold our representatives accountable. Because the truth is, unless transparency wins, this cycle will repeat itself again and again. Different names, different networks, same cover-ups. So where does this leave us? Crockett made it clear: Congress may act, or it may stall, but the real question is whether we, the people, are willing to demand the truth, because justice cannot survive on silence. Survivors deserve more than speeches. They deserve action, they deserve transparency, and they deserve a system that finally puts their voices above the whispers of the powerful. That's why this moment matters. For the first time, a survivor stood in Congress and told the truth. For the first time, lawmakers confronted the idea that Epstein's crimes were never just his own. And for the first time, the public was challenged to step in, to demand full accountability, no matter how uncomfortable the truth may be. The Epstein scandal is not over. The files are still hidden. The enablers are still unnamed. The questions are still unanswered. And unless we demand otherwise, history will repeat itself. So don't let this fade into another forgotten headline. Stay engaged. Support reforms. Ask your representatives where they stand. And keep the pressure on until every document is unsealed, every enabler is exposed, and every survivor is heard. Because sunlight is the best disinfectant, and justice, real justice, cannot survive on silence. And if you want to see more deep dives into the stories the powerful would rather bury, make sure you hit subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications. That way you won't miss the next time truth breaks through the silence.